So as a lot of you know, we use a wet sandblaster to do a lot of our blasting on our steel for a couple of reasons. One, because of where we are, there's environmental restrictions on dry sandblasting. They get a bit antsy about all the dust and all that sort of stuff. So we use a wet sandblaster because it pretty much removes about maybe 98% of the dust. It's pretty awesome. Here's a quick shot of the sandblaster in action so you can sort of see the level of dust. So with that in mind, it's basically blasting fresh water onto mild steel that's had all of the protection, so mill scale, paint, whatever, ripped off it. So it does rust. You can do one of two things. You can either put like a rust preserver type thing into the water that you're blasting with so that it doesn't rust afterwards, and some of the professional wet blaster guys do that, and that works, that's great. Or you can deal with it after, which is the way that we do it. So we actually use this stuff here. It's basically like a rust preventer converter type stuff. So I wanted to show you what we do with the rust converter. So at the moment it's iron oxide, all of this orange sort of rust and everything, and I did a bit of a Google. Using it's phosphoric acid is the I suppose the working agent in this stuff, and apparently it converts it to iron phosphate. So yeah, it's pretty fast acting, like a couple of minutes and this is back to bare steel. So I'll do it on the camera just to show you. So it's about the consistency of water, so it's quite runny, so tiny amount goes a huge way. So like already that's going grey. That'll pretty much be back to bare steel in, I don't know, 20 seconds, something like that. It's pretty amazing stuff. And then yeah, you can leave it about an hour and paint straight over top of it. I think some say you can wipe it off and then paint over top, but it's compatible with paint, so like with oil-based paints and so on, so it really doesn't make any difference. You can just put the paint straight over top. So that's why we don't stress too much about causing rust when we wet water blast, is because we know we're going to be putting a rust preparation type converter on the steel. I mean, look at that, like, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 seconds, something like that. It's already back to basically grey steel. So this whole room has had this done, so wherever we do our wet blasting, this is what we use now. It's an incredibly effective way of basically sealing out rust for good. Yeah, so if you're wondering about dealing with rust, so if you've got something that's rusty and you need to deal with it, probably the best thing I could suggest is knock as much of the loose stuff off as possible. You don't have to get it perfect. This, obviously the better you get it, like blasting the steel is probably the best preparation you can get for steel, full stop, because it prepares the surface, like it scratches it up quite well. You get like dimples all over it. It's basically the same finish you get on anything, so steel, wood, concrete, doesn't matter what it is, it leaves the same sort of finish. Ideally that's the best, so preparing the surface with sandblasting. If you can't do that, then get in there as much as you can. Just don't use flapper wheels and stuff like that. So if you flapper wheel steel, you end up smoothing it out and the paint has nothing to stick on. So we made that mistake early on. We flapper wheeled sand and then paint pretty much just fell off. Sorry, flapper wheeled sand. We flapper wheeled steel and that paint pretty much just fell off after 6 months or so. So don't do that. It's just an utter waste of time. You're better off to get as coarse a grit as you can. So sometimes you can get 16 grit grinding wheels. They're like a sanding disc that goes on a rubber pad or something like that, but they're really, really coarse. That's kind of good because it garks the heck up out of the surface and it gives the paint something to bite onto. You could do needle guns and stuff like that. They're not great and they're pretty hard going, but they do an okay job. But yeah, basically remove any loose rust or any rubbish like that and then get into it with something like this, like a rust kill, rust converter, something that's got phosphoric acid in. And then yeah, you should be able to get it clean enough so it's not going to cause you too much dramas until you can fix it properly, a year or two down the track. So that's how we deal with rust. So this is the bathroom. It's basically that rust converter's been on there for maybe, I don't know, 10 minutes tops at the most. So I'll show you what it's like. So right up close, you can see it does that sort of little bubbling. So that's pretty standard, it does do that. And then after a while it'll come down to, I don't know if you can see this, but it sort of goes into a bit sort of chalky kind of finish. What I tend to do is let it sort of sit for at least an hour, maybe two, and it pretty much goes surface hard, and then I just give it a bit of a brush over with like a hard bristle plastic brush. It takes all of that rubbish off, all those little bubbles and stuff, and then yeah, you're able to pretty much paint it straight away. So that's our bathroom extension painted up for now. So this is some steelwork that's had rust converter applied. It's been on there for a couple of days now, so it's nice and hard, and you can sort of see it goes almost crystal-y like, but it's basically a hard surface that you can put primers over. You can either put a single pack or a 2-pack. It's fine with both options. So if you have a look here, this is basically a single pack, and if you don't clean off, you do get bubbles and stuff. You can sort of see that. See how you get a bit of a rough surface? This whole thing's going to be fed in, so it's going to have about 1/2 mil of furring compound put over it, so I'm not too worried about that stuff, including the runs and so on. I just wanted to make sure it had a really decent coat of etch over it before we start putting any furring on it. So that single pack works fine with that. And then in here, this is a 2-pack. So you can sort of see that's just rolled on, so the finish isn't great, but it works just as well. That was a Jotun product that we used. So it comes up pretty good. So this is the first stage, and I want to show you what it's like when we go to the next stage, which is sanding this, ready to put a 2-pack on top of it. So when I'm sanding this rust converter on steel, I use just an orbital sander. The disc that I'm using is an old disc, but it's also 210 grit. I don't want to rip into the rust converter too much because I want to get a fine finish, but it doesn't matter if I go into steel, but I want to try not to go into the steel. So all I'm trying to do here is basically take off any of the bubbles and high bits and stuff like that, and they're not strong, so they don't take, you know, a huge amount of grunt. You don't need like a 40 grit or something ridiculous. You can just whip it off with something fine. So I'll show you how that comes up when I get into it with this. So you can see that it takes next to no time whatsoever to sand. Again, you're not trying to rip it all off, you're just trying to skim off the top sort of high spots. Yeah, I'll show you a bit close so it comes up. So here's a good example. On the right hand side or in the centre there, you can see stuff that isn't sanded, and you can sort of see these bubbles and so on. That's what we're trying to take off. And then that's exactly the same stuff, just sanded. So it's a really beautifully smooth finish, and you can see all the imperfections. So this is where I had to, when I put this wall on, I put welded a piece of steel on so I could lift it up, and then obviously I ground it off and gucked it up a wee bit. That'll all be fed in, so that won't matter, but it gives you a good example as to all of the little imperfections show up, so you kind of get a heads up as to how bad your wall's going to be or whatever it is when you paint it, if you're worried about a fair surface. In this case we want to get it as fair as we can possibly get. But yeah, it gives you an idea. It's really smooth, it's really beautiful, it's going to have a great finish when it's done. So once we've given all of the surface a good sand and then a good vacuum clean to essentially make sure we've got all the rubbish off, in this case it was quite a lot of sand from when we blasted, got into all the nooks and crannies and stuff, got to get all of that out. We've got to give, because we're using 2-pack, we've got to use a specific 2-pack thinner. So we're going to give the whole thing a wipe down with we use Jotun 2-pack, so we're going to use Jotun thinners, so we'll give the whole thing a wipe down and go over it, make sure it's spotless, and then we can start putting the actual 2-pack on. The trick when you're using your thinners, so I've got quite a big can here, it's probably 4 litres, something like that, whatever it is. I'm only going to use a tiny amount of it to wipe the whole thing down. If I was to get the rag and go straight out of the main can, I'm going to contaminate that can. So simple trick is get a plastic cup or something and just chuck a little bit in there, and then essentially you can always keep your main can full of good thinners rather than thinners that will be contaminated by paint or in this case rust converter or whatever. just helps stuff last a bit longer. So I don't know if you've seen our other videos, but when I put etch on, I don't know, sometimes the instructions say not to do this, but I find that putting a decent thick coat of etch gives me a pretty good result. It's fairly high build etch anyway, so you're going to get a relatively thick coat to start with. But in this case, I'm not too concerned with surface quality because I'm going to be sanding it back with 240 grit. I just want to get a really thick coat of paint on it. So I'm going to use a fluffy roller. So have a look at the end of this video, there'll be a link to a video about the roller types and the different surfaces you get. But this is epoxy 2-pack put on with a fluffy roller. So I'll show you the finished quality that we get. So this gives you an idea. You can sort of see it's orange peely and all sort of roughed up. It's not the end of the world. In case you're wondering, this is a meat tray. After 500 litres of paint going through bucket loads of the whiz-bang plastic trays, we found that a meat tray does exactly the same job and doesn't cost us anything. So I belt the paint into the corner with the roller like that. That's why I like to have lots and lots of paint on the roller. I'm sure there's plenty of painters out there that'll tell me it's the wrong thing to do, but come and paint on my boat if you want to tell me that. So just sort of nice, slow, easy strokes. And you can sort of see that that's coming up pretty even now. So I normally roll back over it like that, so I get a uniform sort of finish. I don't really get any lines. So I'll do 2 coats like that, and that builds it up pretty thick. I don't know how many micron or whatever, but thick enough to sand decently anyway. Occasionally it'll go down into bare steel, but that's fine. I'll just chuck another bit of primer over those spots, you know. So again, make sure I've rammed it into that corner. So there you go. So that's a fluffy roller. It's a 4-inch roller, or 100mm if you're from the 21st century. Sorry, Americans. So there we go. So fluffy roller, epoxy 2-pack. We're using a Jotun, but probably doesn't make any difference in terms of finish quality. It's Jotun Mastic 90, in case you're actually specifically wondering. It goes on really easy, nice thick covers. Doesn't actually need a lot of paint coverage because it's such a thick paint to start with. We've used Jotun in a few areas on the boat, so pretty much we haven't. The only reason why we use it, it's not, again, not product placement. The only reason why we use Jotun is because the local trawler repair guy uses it, and we have an arrangement with him. You know, when they buy 100 litres of paint to spray a trawler or something like that, and he might have 5 litres left over, I go and buy that off him for next to nothing. I get basically brand new paint for a really good price. I would use probably any other brand if he recommended it, because these are boats that spend 9 months of the year at sea, so they, yeah, it has to work. If it doesn't work, they yell at Tony, so I trust what he does. So yeah, so that's us. That's basically painting with epoxy on a fluffy roller. I'll put a video up of how this dries. It basically looks exactly the same, but I'll put a shot up at the end of this video of that paint dried. So if you're wondering how to do it on your boat, this is how we do it on Brupeg. So this is the new bathroom extension, all painted. So that's the room that we just showed you, basically blasted, rust killed, sanded back, and then a Jotun Mastic 90 2-pack epoxy put over the whole thing. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Check out our other videos. We've got plenty of videos on paint roller types, steel work, how to blast the steel, prepare the steel. So check out our links in the description. If you're doing any of this work on your boat, it's worth taking 10 minutes and just having a bit of a watch through, and you can get a few ideas and hopefully solve some issues at your end. Thanks.